This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a run through the markets here for you. Some interesting news on the telco front. Ethiopia will announce the winners of the telecommunications licenses it's put up for auction later on in April. Business Daily, a Kenyan newspaper, reported that Safaricom was one of the 6 firms shortlisted. Safaricom share price has had a fairly strong start to the year. It's up by at least 12% to as high as 39 shillings a share. The bull run in South African equities, at least as far as the year is concerned, pretty much ended today, with the all share shaving off nearly 0.2% in today's session, pulling back from record levels over 67,000 points. Gold miners particularly hard hit. Anglo Gold Ashanti down by over 7%. Goldfields was lower at 3.5% ahead of full year results that are due tomorrow. Here's what's coming up tonight. Nigeria's public debt load has hit a record $92 billion. South Africa started to roll out the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine amid concerns from some quarters. And what will ever stop Bitcoin? It's hit yet another record of $51,700 in today's session. We'll get into crypto in the course of the hour, but first let's start in Nigeria. The country's public debt load has hit an all-time high of $92 billion. The country's been borrowing at a high rate over the last 60 months, partly to invest in infrastructure. But experts argue that if this borrowing spree continues amidst the current economic realities of low growth, stubbornly high unemployment and a relatively limited tax revenue base, the country may eventually end up in a debt crisis. Phil Ihaza starts us off from Abuja.
Temple Robert powers his generator to try and ensure a steady power supply. It's an example of Nigeria's infrastructure challenges. He says he's racked up huge losses trying to cope with unreliable electricity.
I've been a barber for the past 12 years, and the electricity supply in this area is very poor, and I use 60 or 50% of my daily income to buy fuel to power my gen.
Nigeria's government says it requires $3 trillion to fix its infrastructure, from electricity to roads and housing. Within the last 5 years, it has increased its borrowing to fix the country's ailing infrastructure, and now the total debt profile is $92 billion, the highest level ever. Yet, the government plans to borrow an additional $11 billion this year, saying the GDP to debt ratio is still at a safe level of less than 40%. But experts warn that if the trend of borrowing continues, a debt crisis looms.
You don't use GDP to service your debt, you use revenue to service your debt. Now, with this metric, we're doing very poorly. Before the pandemic, it was about 60% we're using about 60% of our revenue to service our debts. And the estimates for 2020, it shows that we're going to be using about 96% of our revenue to service our debts based on IMF estimates.
Since September, economic activities have been picking up after a 6-month lockdown due to COVID-19. And the government says it's now on course to generate more revenue to service its loans.
It's also good news for Nigeria's economy that oil prices have risen to more than $60 a barrel. But experts say the country won't be able to pay down its debt on oil revenue alone.
So apart from the magnitude, right, we need to be exporting an increased number of goods, not just oil, because don't forget that it's the foreign exchange that is being used to service the debts, and your major source of foreign exchange is oil.
President Buhari says his administration is determined to diversify the economy and create a better environment for small businesses before the end of his tenure in 2023. If achieved, it could see businesses like Temples cut their losses and help the country generate more revenue to pay back its debts. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Onto the world of cybercrime. A court in the United States has sentenced a Nigerian entrepreneur who also showed up in the Forbes Africa 30 Under 30 list some years ago. The man in question is Obiwane Okeke. He's been sentenced to 10 years behind bars for compute and wire fraud. Popularly known as Invictus Obi, Invictus of course being the name of the company group that he set up, Okeke was found guilty of causing approximately $11 million in known losses to victims of cybercrime between 2015 and 2019. He'd earlier on pleaded guilty to the charges back in June. According to a court in Virginia, through subterfuge and impersonation, Okeke engaged in a multi-year global business email and computer hacking scheme that caused $11 million in losses to at least one victim. Okeke, the founder of Invictus Group, has a degree in international studies and a forensic criminology, and he also has a master's degree as well in international relations and counter-terrorist studies from the University of Monash in Australia. All right then, so off the back of that particular story, what does the cybersecurity landscape look like across Africa in 2020 and perhaps even in 2021? Let's explore that in some detail with Dr. Bright Gemeli Maodor. He's the cybersecurity researcher. He's also the head of managed cybersecurity services at Dimension Data and the co-founder of Africa Hack On. Dr. Gemeli, good to have you on the program. So let's start with some background. 2020, deeply unprecedented year in how we work and we learn. A lot of us had to do things remotely. What were the defining cybercrime trends that you saw in 2020?
Yeah, so in 2020, a lot of things happened that we were not expecting. Digital transformation came in at a point in time where nobody expected it to happen. So cyber criminals took advantage of that fact that people are not aware, people are not ready to be able to actually protect themselves. So one major thing that was there, which was a very significant part of cybercrime, was phishing attacks. Phishing attacks, people get to be sent links, enticing them to click on something or to install an application onto their laptops or their systems, and hackers take control over the system entirely, either by locking them out, which we see as ransomware, or by taking over their computer networks and being able to use that to infiltrate into their systems, their emails, or even exfiltrating data, very crucial data. So cyber criminals took a lot of advantage of that, because everybody started moving to virtual environment, Zoom and Google Meet and the likes. So what they do is, how can we make sure that they can send a legitimate looking like email that somebody has to click? So everybody was clicking on links because everybody was confused. And that was one of the that was one of the biggest cybercrime that we saw, which is allowing cyber criminals to get into organizations, especially financial systems.
Let me just jump in there, because, you know, for as long as we've been running around with the net, I mean, we're both part of that generation that sort of grew up with computers at some point in the home. I mean, phishing attacks have been around for ages. It's an old tactic. How is it that in 2021 it's still effective? How are people still falling for this?
Looking at the tool set and the kind of arsenal that cyber criminals are using, the tactics are changing. And the thing is, there are new ways of getting to bypass traditional security systems, and also new ways to be able to infiltrate. So the thing is that 2020 was just a start of it. And I think it kind of opened doors for cyber criminals to know that, hey, a lot of people actually do not know what to do when this kind of attacks have happened. So they actually target a numerous amount of people, thousands and millions of people, because out of 1 million people, you get at least 100 people who are going to potentially click on a link or be able to give you access to what you want. So 2021, we're going to see a lot more stuff happening. A lot of organizations or businesses are trying to move to the cloud, and cloud systems also come with their own dangers. So because everybody's rushing to actually make changes, like I said, digital transformation was only on paper and not a thing that a lot of people took into consideration. People planned it down, but they've never been able to implement. So this is a time when they want to actually actively be able to embrace it and be able to actually take over it. But cyber criminals, on the other hand, know that people are about to do all of these kind of activities, so they inject into that process. So they're basically getting part of what is going on, and that's why they're very successful at what they're doing.
Right. We've also seen, of course, a different sort of threat actor emerge over the last decade or so. Cyber mercenaries emerging as key threat actors, really, in other parts of the world. Transparent Tribe, for example, has gained notoriety for their espionage work.
Yes.
But we tend to speak about these things happening in other markets, in Iran, in Europe, in the United States. But how prevalent are these persistent threat groups in key markets here in the continent, in South Africa, in Kenya, and in Nigeria?
Rama, I'll be very honest with you. This actually happened to somebody right here in Kenya, just down the street from me, where I am right now. This person lost he lost millions of, he almost lost, I think, £1 million and the likes because of an email phishing attack. And that, we call it business email compromise. What that means is that hackers are targeting top level executives in organizations, whereby they send them links because they don't really pay attention to a lot of things. They're thinking about executive part of work. They don't think about what is coming to them, what is legitimate, what is not legitimate. So it's happening right here in Kenya. I've seen something happen in Ghana as well. The same thing that we're seeing that has happened in the States and the likes. I saw that happen in Nigeria, South Africa also it has happened. But I personally has been involved in an investigation right here in Kenya where that happened to an individual, where he got compromised because of what they call a business email compromise, where they took over his email, and the person basically was an intermediary between him and another communicator. So he's here in Kenya, his partner is in another country, and the mediator set up another domain which looks very similar and communicating to the two people. So none of them have an idea of who they're talking to, thinking it's the same person. So if we have, let's say, brightgamily.com, they put Bright Gamily, but the I at the end is a 1. Most people don't pay attention to that, and that is what is happening. It's been used so many times, and they change documents because if you filtrated your emails, they know what you're receiving, they know what orders you're about to place, they know what shipment is coming, they know the shipping order. So all they do is they take that document, change the bank account detail to somewhere they can easily cash out, and they'll be able to actually release all the money. So that is happening right here in Kenya as well.
Indeed, and of course that is basically the same playbook that Okeke used in essentially compromising Caterpillar's export sales side. But related to that, isn't part of the problem in trying to figure out how big a problem this is the fact that a lot of the companies or individuals who may be targets, who may be victims of such attacks, are simply not willing to actually speak up about it in public? Because, I mean, in this part of the world, we're still very wary about saying, yeah, actually our systems were compromised, even though perhaps from a legislative perspective, we may not necessarily face penalties for that sort of thing.
Yeah, so doing a responsible disclosure is not a thing that we have experienced in a lot of countries in Africa, because there are no laws or there are no stringent laws to actually let you know that you have to disclose such a thing. In the United States, for example, I know you have to disclose if you have been compromised and make sure that everybody has to know. So the policies and the governance aspect of things has to be relied on the governments to be able to make sure that they can actually let you know exactly what is happening, and they can actually make sure that we get to implement this in every organization, be it government or being private. If you have been compromised, you have to let your customers know that you have been compromised, and the magnitude of that attack or cyber attack for them to make sure that these are the measures you've taken to be able to actually implement things. So looking at GDPR, which is working in the European aspect of things, but even in right here in Kenya, we have the the Computer Misuse Act has been passed. We have the Data Protection Act has also been there. It's only now that we need to actually make sure that this is actually a realization. Most countries in Africa now have what you call data protection commissions, but some of them don't have data protection commissioners, because the commissioners will be the ones to be able to actually relay this information and give directive to the government, to the private sector as well, saying, you being a data controller or a data processor, you have to have certain standards to put in place. And if you actually get to be compromised, you have to disclose that information to the public.
Right. One last question for you now that you're on the program. How significant a problem is the installation and use of crypto mining malware, at least on the continent? Because we've seen crypto values going up, at least in dollar terms, very strongly since the second half of 2020. Bitcoin's gone up by over 450%. Ethereum is up nearly 700% since the start of July. That's a strong incentive to try and reconfigure botnets to deploy this kind of malware, isn't it?
That is very true, Rama. I mean, that is really true. You're really spot on that. Botnets have been deployed. Like I said, cyber criminals are now creating a lot of ransomwares, which will take over your machine, will encrypt it, and actually ask you to be able to pay for it. That's ransomware right now, which is being created by a lot of people. It's getting easier to actually create. Anybody can pick up a source code from the internet, which is publicly available, and recode it. I can do that myself. And it only now takes you to where you want to actually put it, and they want you to be paid in Bitcoin. Now, looking at the value of Bitcoins going higher and higher, meaning cyber criminals are going to cash out a lot more, or going to get a lot more money out of it when they charge you and say, you need to pay about 2 Bitcoins. That's a lot of money right now because of the rate. But there are possible botnets that are trying to fluctuate how the pricing is going and the rate in the market as well, just the way the stock exchange actually works. So I believe that's what is happening because there's a lot of unknowns in the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency world. And Bitcoin, for example, right now is still some sort of how the methodology, how it's used to actually change its pricing is still unknown to a lot of people.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Dr. Bright Gameli-Maodor, thank you very much for your time this evening. Let's move on to Zambia now. The country became the second in the world to raise its benchmark policy rate this year as it's looking to bring down inflation that is at a 5-year high. The country's Monetary Policy Committee lifted its policy rate by 50 basis points to 8.5%. That is the first increase in Zambia since November 2019, and it follows tightening by its eastern neighbour, Mozambique, just last month. Now, the MPC decision was what it described as a delicate balancing act between the need to fight inflation on one hand, but also the need to accommodate the economy. And this, of course, was done after 2 days of deliberations. The central bank, it says, stands ready to tighten policy even further, with inflation seen moving even further out from the bank's target of between 6 to 8% over the next 2 years. All right, then a quick run through some company news. Back to telecommunications briefly. As we mentioned a little earlier, Safaricom, Kenya's largest telco service providers, made it to the short list of 6 firms that have been cleared to bid for one of 2 Ethiopian telecommunications licenses to be offered this year. The Ethiopian Communications Authority whittled down the list from a consortium of 12 that had initially expressed interest in getting into the country's telecommunications market. This, remember, is a country of 100 million people. Firms will be required to submit their technical and financial bids by the 5th of April, compared to a previous deadline of the 5th of March. Tanzania's Communications Regulatory Authority has fined 6 mobile phone companies, a total of about $16.4 million, for violating the quality of services on their networks. However, the authorities instructed the telcos not to wire the money to the authority, but instead to use it to invest it back in the networks to improve service delivery within 90 days. According to the regulator, Tigo was fined $5.6 million, Airtel $5 million, Vodacom $3.4 million. The pharmacy group Dischem says it's reaped the benefits of consumers' increased interest in preventing disease, and is reporting remarkable growth in the sales of vitamins and chronic drugs over the past few months. In a trading update for the 22 weeks up to the 2nd of February, the group said it had gained market share and consumers focused on more preventive healthcare. Group sales are up by over 12% to $785,000. And Google is teaming up with the European Investment Fund and 2 other organizations in Latin America and Asia to provide some $75 million in funding to small and medium-sized companies that are suffering from the economic fallout of the pandemic. The funds are part of an $800 million initiative announced in March last year in response to the pandemic. Google has also set up a $26 million loan fund with Kiva to help businesses in Africa, the Middle East and Indonesia. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. South Africa has rolled out its vaccination program using Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine. And economists in Ghana are warning that a surge in COVID-19 cases will slow down an economic recovery in 2021.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's head over to the continent's most industrialized economy. South Africa started administering the vaccine developed by Johnson & Johnson to healthcare workers and top government officials. South Africa switched to using the J&J developed jab for initial inoculations after a small-scale study showed that the shots developed by AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford had little impact on mild to moderate illness from the country's dominant strain of COVID-19. Here's Julie Shire with this report from Cape Town.
There was much relief as South Africa's COVID-19 vaccine rollout kicked off. The program was delayed when it was found that the AstraZeneca vaccine from India was not effective against the local variant.
On the 29th of January, your vaccine works. That Monday, you hear that that AstraZeneca may not work, and you start to see what you can do. How can I bring this vaccine? How can we bring this vaccine to South Africans 17 days later, and only miss the 2 days of the vaccine rollout?
Health authorities were forced to find an alternative and turned to the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It has a 57% efficacy rate against South Africa's 501Y V2 strain. President Cyril Ramaphosa and several healthcare workers were the first recipients.
It gives us another layer of protection in the fight against this disease, and I'd encourage everyone to please take the vaccine. This vaccine gives us hope.
28% of South Africa's 1.25 million healthcare workers have so far registered for the vaccine, but just 80,000 shots were flown into the country so far.
Very excited. I'm absolutely delighted that the vaccines are in the country and that they're already being administered. I've been following the research behind the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I'm very confident it's a great vaccine.
The first round of vaccines will go mainly to healthcare workers in the state facilities. Many others still have a long wait.
We've lost so many colleagues from COVID-19, and when you come here, it's like you are just putting yourself in the deep end. But somebody needs to do the job. If I die like a soldier while saving my people, let it be.
More doses of the Johnson & Johnson's and Pfizer vaccines are expected to trickle into the country in the next coming weeks as South Africa tries to immunize frontline workers before a third wave hits. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
But we're still in South Africa. A number of analysts over there have raised concerns about the challenges to the country's vaccine rollout plan, which is pivotal to reigniting confidence and spending within the economy. Here's Angelo Coppola with more from Johannesburg.
The significance of the pivot from AstraZeneca to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and its effect on growth projections varies.
Until we have herd immunity, we are going to have stop-start to the economy, because currently there is an expectation of a third wave come winter, which the Department of Health through the Minister of Health, Zolim Kize, have also highlighted. But we will expect another wave in addition to that, a fourth wave come next summer.
There's still some questions about the lack of an effective vaccine rollout strategy.
So I think it does limit our ability to get the economy going. Clearly, even though the infection numbers are reduced, it's going to be a considerable length of time before people feel more comfortable in terms of just starting to open back up again and try and get functioning.
Economic growth will occur globally, including South Africa in 2021. It's the quantum that's being questioned.
We're going to recover, but not to the same extent. Whether we call that being bearish, I wouldn't say so, because we are recovering from negative growth to positive growth this year. but our recovery is much slower compared to other economies.
Part of that recovery will be driven by inventory restocking. This as companies let stock levels reduce to zero because of uncertainty.
As you move from inventory depletion into a slight increase in inventories. I'm not expecting companies to build up inventories dramatically. I don't think the confidence is there yet, but I think that even if you get some stability in the inventory cycle, it would be good.
Economic growth projections range from 2.8% to 4.6% in 2021. That could change very quickly, especially if the developed world countries' inflation rate increases.
If they were to see inflation pick up faster than what they expect, and then hike interest rate faster than what they are currently penciling in, it means we may experience the taper tantrum of 2013 that will come with disruptions to financial markets and also capital flow outflows from emerging markets.
Despite the best efforts by stakeholders locally to grow the country's economy, South Africa is part of an interconnected world, and any changes, positively or negatively, globally will affect the local economy. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, still in the business of vaccinations, we're seeing more and more African countries rolling out their vaccination drives. But the emergence of COVID-19 variants is still a key challenge they all will have to deal with. Earlier on, we spoke to the director of the Africa CDC, Dr. John Kengasong, about the impact of these variants on immunization campaigns.
The emergence of COVID-19 variant means a lot for the whole world, not just for Africa. But in Africa, it means that as we are beginning to see that it limits the possibilities of using certain vaccines in a certain context, like the current discussion that we are having around the AstraZeneca vaccine for its use in South Africa. And I think because of the variants that were identified there, and that became predominant. And I really want to underline the word predominant variant there, because the narrative should not be that if you pick one individual with that variant strain in a country, then the vaccine cannot be used in that country. That is not accurate. You really have to have a systematic systematic analysis of the variant over time to document that the variant has become a predominant variant that will impact a certain vaccine. So I think that is what it means. It means that we have to monitor them. I mean, it poses an additional layer of analysis on the continent. Just besides testing, we need to analyze through genetic sequencing to understand what kind of variants or strains are circulating in each country. First of all, I think we have to appreciate the international cooperation and solidarity that is going on around the COVAX facility, which is a mechanism that was put in very, very, very early on. But unfortunately, both efforts that have been put in place either through the COVAX facility or through regional approaches have been hindered because rich countries have purchased these vaccines advance and procure large doses of the vaccines that even if you have the money, you cannot necessarily get the vaccine. So I think that becomes a serious challenge for a timely access to immunizing people. So I like to assure the citizens of Africa that these vaccines are very safe. And they've gone through a very rigorous process, and you have your own public health agencies like the World Health Organization, the Africa Centers for Disease Control, and local authorities watching over the safety-ness of these vaccines. So the vaccines are very safe.
On to West Africa, economists in Ghana are warning that a surge in COVID-19 cases will restrict the country's economic recovery this year. The West African oil and gold producer plans to procure and administer some 17.6 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines in the first half of the year. But there's a lot of uncertainty around that target, as CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Ghana's economy was projected to recover this year after being battered by the COVID-19 pandemic last year. Ratings agency Fitch had estimated growth of 4.8%, but a spike in infections is now threatening the country's economic growth.
We thought the recovery was going to be quickened, and we noticed some of the numbers, the macroeconomic numbers, coming up a bit. But with the restrictions coming again, if we are not very careful, we are probably going to go southward again in terms of the macroeconomic numbers, and particularly the macro small enterprise businesses.
The central bank has maintained its lending rate at 14.5% for the fifth time to cushion the economy. It hopes this will keep the cost of doing business affordable. Analysts, however, say the country's economic recovery will depend on how the government handles the surge of the COVID-19 infections.
Government should be upfront and head-on with tackling this upsurge. If we don't tackle it, it is going to make nonsense of every economic progress we have made, and it will be difficult to now correct it when we get to the doldrums.
The government has reimposed restrictions on social events to limit the spread of infections. The situation is already taking its toll on businesses within the hospitality industry. While Ghana's economic recovery is threatened by the spike in COVID-19 infections, the central bank says investor confidence is also at risk. The government, however, hopes to improve access to loans in order to lessen the impact of the pandemic on local businesses. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Tunisia has rolled out a platform designed to support SMEs hit hard by the pandemic. This pandemic, of course, has left thousands of companies, especially in the tourism-dependent parts of the North African nation, facing collapse amid a sharp economic contraction last year. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adin Chouachi.
A recent study in Tunisia has revealed that about 92% of entrepreneurs are seeking financial support from the government in order to tackle the COVID-19 health crisis. The study, which was conducted among 950 firms and 200 startups, as well as 1,000 business managers aged under 35, is a pointer to the effects of the virus that has decimated the country's crucial tourism industry after it plunged 65% in 2020. Authorities have launched a digital platform that seeks to identify businesses that will need government support to keep them afloat.
The platform is operational and companies are already registering to get the financial support from the Finance Ministry and the Social Affairs Department. The government also offers multiple funding options, including loans for those seeking relief.
The government says that tax payment for companies will be deferred for 6 months. However, the state will face some $400 million revenue loss due to the outbreak of the first and the second wave of the pandemic.
Deferring business taxes, loans and social security contribution payments until September 2021 will help the company's cash flows. It is an indirect aid. More elaborate measures will also be implemented. The situation is very difficult for the state and companies in all industries.
Members of the Finance Commission at Parliament say 11% of Tunisian companies are planning to recruit employees over the next 12 months. However, 59% of these enterprises will only hire senior executives.
The incentives offered by the state and the digitization of the procedure will motivate business managers to invest and hire again in the next few months. Creating job opportunities is the objective of the government because too many people lost their jobs due to the pandemic.
The Finance Ministry has revealed that 78% of Tunisian entrepreneurs assert that the launching process of their projects had been interrupted by the health crisis in 2020.
According to data from the Tunisian National Institute of Statistics, the government predicts that the unemployment rate will reach 22% in the next few months. In addition, thousands of jobs were also lost in the informal sector, which employs 44% of workers in agriculture, tourism, catering and trade. Abdel Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Nigeria's two-time finance minister, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, was confirmed on Monday as the Director General of the World Trade Organization. Now, her appointment marks the first time that a woman and an African will head that global trade body. It is a culmination of a long, drawn-out process to recruit a new head for the WTO. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more on the new Director General of the WTO and what her appointment means for the continent.
Her journey to the top of the WTO has been a remarkable one. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala has come a long way after holding several high-profile positions both at the global stage and in her home country, Nigeria. She served as Nigeria's finance minister twice, was a managing director of the World Bank, and also a head of the Global Vaccine Alliance, Gavi. And now she's setting a record as the first woman and first African to head the WTO. She says the import of it all is not lost on her.
I absolutely do feel an additional burden. I can't lie about that. Being the first woman and the first African means that one really has to perform. I've always said these are wonderful things. It's groundbreaking. All credit to members for electing me and making that history. But the bottom line is that if I want to really make Africa and women proud, I have to produce results. And that's where my mind is at now.
Across Nigeria and Africa, many are celebrating her for landing the WTO top job.
First African, first woman, that is significant enough. I mean, and that's why everybody has been celebrating her, even beyond the African continent. And especially in a period where people feel that women should be allowed to play more significant roles in society. Of course, she comes fully qualified. She's not the WTO DG on the basis of being a woman, but on the basis of her qualification for the position of a Director General of the World Trade Organization.
In Africa, expectations on her remain high, especially given the recent launch of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
We are now going to depend on her to guide us in the implementation of our Africa Free Trade Area, because other trading blocs may be having issues with us in what we are trying to do. Because when you have this our agreement, what we'll do is that we'll waive duty among ourselves, all right? Within the WTO, there's what they call MFM, which is the most favored nation clause that says all members should be treated the same. But the African members are treating themselves the same, but not the others. So some may take us to court there and then say that we are discriminating against them.
Africans generally have in Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala somebody who will represent them well, who would also take on African issues. I quite believe that she would not want to leave that job without at least impacting positively, getting something for Africa in the whole mix of the World Trade Organization. Even though it's a tough ask, but I think she will do her best.
When the euphoria eventually dies down and she begins work on March the 1st, Okonjo-Iweala faces the difficult task of uniting the members of the WTO so that the organization could begin to work towards more transparent and open global trade. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
At 18:37 GMT, time for another break. Here's what's coming up. Bitcoin hits a fresh record, vaulting over $51,700. And Mario Draghi is promising sweeping reforms as Italy's new prime minister.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour, starting in Zanzibar. The first vice president there, Saif Sharif Hamad, has died at the age of 77. He was recently hospitalized after contracting COVID-19. Zanzibar's president, Hussein Mwinyi, has announced 7 days of mourning with a flag flown at half-mast. Saif, for many years, was a leading opposition figure on the island. The cause of his death has not yet been made public. In the meantime, Tanzania's head of state, John Magufuli, has sent a message of condolence to President Mwinyi and the people of Zanzibar. Gunmen have abducted an unknown number of students and staff at a school in Niger State in northern Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari has condemned the raid. He's dispatched security chiefs to coordinate operations to rescue the abducted students. South Africa started its mass COVID-19 vaccination campaign. President Cyril Ramaphosa was among the first people to receive the shot made by Johnson & Johnson alongside healthcare workers in Cape Town. President Ramaphosa's inoculation aims to demonstrate his government's confidence in this particular product. South Africa switched to the one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine after pausing the rollout of AstraZeneca's two-dose vaccine earlier this month. And finally, a bit of a grim milestone here. Libya is marking 10 years since the 2011 uprising, completing a decade of unrest since Libyans revolted against the former head of state, Muammar Gaddafi. An interim government is set to steer the country to elections in December. Libyans hoping that recent peace efforts will eventually unify the North African oil producer. That's a run through your headlines. Onto the world of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin is continuing its blistering rally. It touched the $51,700 mark earlier today and is still above $51,000 as we speak. Bitcoin's value has gone up by over 70% so far this year. It's recently gotten a boost from large firms. Just last week, for example, Tesla said it bought $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin and it plans to accept it as payment for its products. MasterCard also announced plans to open up its network to some cryptocurrencies. Online payment platform PayPal has also made moves to support the use of cryptocurrencies on its network. Italy's new Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, has made his debut as leader in the upper house of the Senate, ahead of a mandatory confirmation vote in his new government. Little over a year after leaving the presidency of the Frankfurt-based European Central Bank, the 73-year-old was asked by Italy's head of state last week to resolve political chaos in Rome and to form the country's 67th post-war government. Draghi promised sweeping reforms to help rebuild Italy after the COVID-19 pandemic. For the man whose illustrious career earned him the nickname of Super Mario, especially when he was at the ECB, expectations are pretty high, with Italian financial markets rallying and the country's broadsheets posting banner headlines on Draghi's moment. If he's successful, it will round out a remarkable career, could line him up to become Italy's next head of state in 2022. On to Cuba now. It's expanding the reach of the country's private sector. Authorities in Havana say this will provide thousands of new employment opportunities. It's an effort by the government of the island state to boost its struggling economy. Here's CGTN's Luis Chirino with this report.
The Cuban government announced this month that private work will be allowed in most sectors of its economy. The measure will impact more than 2,000 activities. Private work had been limited to a small list of 127 sectors set by Havana since 2010. Officials say the expansion of private employment will increase opportunities. Cuba will retain its free education, healthcare, and other services, which will not be open to the private sector. Nuris Higueras is self-employed. She owns a restaurant in downtown Havana that attracts a large clientele, including visitors from the U.S. She invited CGTN to talk about the latest news regarding the private sector at her restaurant, which is currently closed because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Soy dueña de un proyecto hace 10 años.
I've owned this restaurant for the past 10 years, which is part of a family business we started in 1998. In 2010, a larger opening of self-employment allowed me to have my own restaurant.
Higuera says that the just announced measures opening up the private sector are a positive step.
I think this move has recognized the importance of the private sector, and particularly these sectors which can help improve the country's domestic economy.
More than 600,000 Cubans work in the private sector, 13% of the country's labor, mainly in the areas of tourism, transportation, and other services. The private sector's expansion comes amid economic tensions caused by the COVID-19 spread and tough U.S. sanctions imposed over the past few years. Economists here say that the opening of the private initiative will benefit the country.
This reveals the fact that the private or non-state economic sector has huge potential to help take the country out of its current crisis. In that regard, it's positive. It will allow all economic sectors to enjoy similar opportunities.
Although the COVID-19 pandemic has forced the total or partial shutdown of private businesses like these ones behind me, at least for now, Cuba continues to bet to the non-state sector as a crucial actor in the national efforts towards economic recovery. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Havana.
Amidst all the anxieties and disruptions caused by this pandemic, many of us around the world are now shifting towards a much more healthy, hygiene-focused lifestyle. From Seoul, CGTN's Shane Ham takes up the story of one app that's helping to drive that trend in South Korea.
Just point, click, and shoot. Instantly, the nutritional content of this meal appears. No more manually counting your caloric intake, because this mobile app recognizes foods and analyzes their ingredients using artificial intelligence.
The performance will typically be poor if you only collect and recognize the many stock images from brand name companies. We are able to teach the system to use data from actual users, so we can enhance the performance immensely.
So here's how I start out my day. I take a picture of my breakfast, and instantly the AI recognizes and stores the nutritional content of my meal. It's surprisingly accurate, and it can read several food items simultaneously. The program also offers nutritional tips and recipes according to one's dietary goals. Its database grows through its deep learning algorithm and analysis of 2 million meals a year. But the program isn't just about counting calories. The company is looking to expand and offer users more personalized solutions. For instance, working with local hospitals to provide nutritional care for patients suffering from cancer and diabetes.
We are enhancing our experience by providing coaching services to actual patients or people on diets. So we are using that foundation to create a new base of automated consultations.
In the age of COVID-19, mobile technology and wearable devices are replacing certain traditional healthcare services. According to business consulting firm Grandview Research, the global mobile health app market is a $35 billion industry and is expected to grow nearly 45% annually over the next 5 years.
There's a lot of digitized health information that's being collected through things like apps. For example, genetic and medical information, and even fitness data. When all these things can be linked, it can provide people great results in managing their health.
Mobile technology could also slim down your pocketbook in addition to your waistline. Insurance companies are using the information from health apps to design more creative healthcare policies.
Insurance companies aren't just selling insurance policies anymore. They are going beyond that to become risk takers. They are working to expand their services to actively manage and drive the health of consumers.
Ultimately, it will still be up to the individual to make healthy dietary choices. But the next time you see somebody taking a picture of their meal, it might not be going up on a social media post. Shane Ham, CGTN, Seoul.
The 2021 Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation shortlist recognizes some pretty ambitious innovators from around the continent who are developing straightforward, low-cost, scalable solutions to local challenges. This year's list is pretty diverse. It includes a digital financial services solution and a low-cost water-powered ventilator. With that story, here's CGTN's Hannah Viviers on What's Hot.
Nigerian national Yusuf Bilisanmi and his team are among the top contenders this year for the Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation. The team is credited for helping address the supply shortage of ventilators amid the pandemic.
There's a significant demand for oxygen supply globally. When you have a system that requires less oxygen, it makes it much more efficient for hospitals to run. For example, in Lagos, there's a demand of 15 LPM of oxygen, and that requires about 300 cylinders on a daily basis. Right? With our systems, we can go as low as 5 LPM, which reduces that cost to as low as 100 cylinders of oxygen in contrast to 300.
Well, we don't like to. In less than a year, Bilisanmi and his team designed and developed the She-Vent, a low-cost, non-electric and non-invasive ventilator. She-Vent's simple design enables it to be operated by non-specialist healthcare workers in remote parts of the world, especially in Africa. The device can be plugged into existing oxygen supply channels in hospitals, making it suitable for low-resource settings.
So here's the She-Vent, and the way it works is we have oxygen supplied into our venturi. The venturi blends air with oxygen, and then that goes through the expiration pipe. The patient inhales and then exhales into the expiration pipe, which then goes back into the bubbler. And that's, you can see that creates pressure. That pressure, of course, then enables, keeps the airways open, as well as reduces the work of breathing of the patient.
The Africa Prize 2021 shortlist represents 9 countries, including, for the first time, Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal. 6 on the 16-strong shortlist this year are female innovators, including Faith Adesamoah, also from Nigeria. Adesamoah is the lead creator of Social Lender, a digital financial services solution that provides immediate access to formal financial services to those with little to no traditional access to banks. The platform is reported to have so far impacted over 100,000 customers in Nigeria.
Typically, if I use Nigeria as a case point, you find that quite a bit of Nigerians. So it's a problem with financial inclusion. A lot of people are not financially included. In Africa, this is a huge problem by itself. We have millions and millions of Africans who fall into this category. So the idea is these people need access to formal financial services, and we're there to provide that access.
Social Lender uses a proprietary algorithm to perform a social audit of users based on their mobile, social media, and other online activities. The process takes less than 10 minutes.
What we did was we built, it's our own proprietary algorithm. We score that individual, and based on that score, it's an alternative credit score, which we call a social reputation score. Based on the score, that individual can now access services on our platform with the partners that are already on our platform.
The Africa Prize recognizes ambitious African innovators developing scalable engineering solutions to local challenges. The benefits of selection include comprehensive and tailored business training, bespoke mentoring, as well as funding and access to the Academy's network of high-profile, experienced engineers and business experts in the UK and across Africa.
A run through commodity prices. Brent crude has come pretty close to $65 a barrel, $64.74 in the last hour or so. The one outstanding event to keep a very close eye on the supply side at least, is what Saudi Arabia will do next. Consumers, of course, are hardly pleased with this 23% jump in prices that we've seen so far this year. But remember, Saudi Arabia made that particular production cut voluntarily, and it's unilateral, and it's going to apply only in February or March. OPEC has taken some 7-odd million barrels of production offline. The plan is to gradually return roughly 21% of that back into the market over the course of the year. Bloomberg also reporting that the cold weather snap in the US, the biggest producer, of course, in the world, has taken some $3.5 billion of production offline. Put another way, that's like shutting down all the oil production capacity in Nigeria and Angola combined. Here's what's coming up next. Africa's best pizzeria opts for frozen pizzas in order to stay afloat amidst tough economic times. welcome back to the program. Now, like most enterprises around the world, a well-known restaurant in Cape Town, Massimo's Pizzeria, has been seriously affected by the harsh economic impact of the pandemic. The owner of this establishment, Massimo Orione, says he was forced to think out of the box in order to keep the restaurant running and keep most of his staff on payroll. Renee Delcam has that story on Grassroots.
Massimo's Pizzeria won a top international award in 2019 when it was named the best pizzeria in Africa. There was much excitement as people came from far and wide to taste the best pizza on the continent. Then the COVID-19 pandemic struck.
Well, it has been a devastating effect. All of a sudden we had to close and lose everything. But it also made us think laterally out of the box. So, the scope was to be able to keep all the staff, to keep the place open. So we had to think in different ways.
When restaurants reopened after South Africa's hard level 5 lockdown a few months ago, Massimo started selling the frozen version of his world-famous pizza in supermarkets, delis and online stores in and around Cape Town.
I always assumed that my pizza was only good if eaten here at the table. And with the COVID, when we were allowed to reopen, we found out that it wasn't enough what we could do with just take away or small tables. So we decided to try to do the frozen pizza, and they are as good as at the table. They are even better than the takeaway because you take them out of the oven and they are warm. So the frozen pizza has been a positive twist of the COVID.
With more people ordering in these days, Massimo has added a few more authentic Italian dishes to his frozen menu, as well as some homemade Italian liqueurs.
Well, I almost made those liqueurs for my clients at the restaurant. They all love them, and they always ask me, why don't you make them in a more professional way? So we finally got the license. We have 3 different spirits. They will be online, they will be on shops. You can test them at the restaurant, buy them there, and then we can deliver them. Even now that we are in need, people support us because they know that if they come to eat at our place, part of it will go to a charity. So I know that my restaurant will never fail because people will always support us.
With their passion for food, people and charity, Massimo and his team are determined to take the heat and do whatever they can to stay in the kitchen. Renee Delcam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies. Ahead of tomorrow's weekly auction of short-term debt, Kenya Central Bank ran a tap sale of 2 bonds. It looked to raise about $163 million. 97% of the $102 million in bids that it got were accepted for those 2 notes. They both have coupon rates of 11.2%, rather 11.25% and 12%. Respectively. Bitcoin, as always, really the big story of the year. It continues its record-setting run, coming just within $300 of $52,000. Today's peak, $51,719, but of course this information might be completely invalid by the time we get it on air. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your time in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.